time over to Matthew Goodwin, Dr. Goodwin. I'd like to just say a few words. You have this information in your pack, but Dr. Matthew Goodwin is an assistant professor here at UPRKA in the English department. He completed his PhD in comparative literature at the University of Massachusetts. How do I pronounce this correctly? Help me.
Amherst.
Amherst? Amherst, thank you. Where he focused on Latino literature. At the UPRKA here, he's the mentor to the student fiction writing group, The Blank Page, and in this capacity, regularly offers workshops on creative writing, particularly science fiction and fantasy. He's also a published editor, a translator. He is the editor of Latino Rising, an anthology of science fiction and fantasy written by Latinos. And he joins us today from the US, from Wisconsin, right?
Yes, Wisconsin, yeah.
I think we could have. So we have a couple of seconds delay, as you can hear, but we will do our best. Matthew was very keen to participate, and not being in the island was not an issue. So thank you very much for your participation. I will pass the floor over to you, Dr. Goodwin.
Yeah, thank you. And it's actually really great because Sally has created a really nice program for you guys. So you're going to go through the process from kind of beginning to end of writing a short story. So it's actually really great. I mean, I think you guys are going to do well. So this semester I'm not teaching on campus in Cayenne, and I'm in Wisconsin in the U.S. But I was very excited because this program I think is really cool. Something I wish I had when I was in high school. So we're going to talk about what's called flash fiction. Okay, and this is the term that people use. There's a number of different terms, but flash fiction basically is a really, really short story. Now, another word for that is microfiction, microficción, and this can be as short as like one sentence to like maybe 2,000 words, within that range. And I think one thing to point out in the beginning is that, you know, this little story that you're going to write is not part of a larger story that you would write, like a novel or even like a regular short story that is 6,000 words. You know, if you want to write your novel later, you can do it. And actually lots of novels have come out of flash fiction or like little 500-word stories. But this particular genre of flash fiction, you've got to think of it as like a separate little thing, yeah? So it's not one little chapter or one little piece of a larger one, okay? And that actually makes it challenging. And because typically we just, you know, like, okay, well, tell a story and like, you know, write and write and write and there's your story. But if you've only got a little bit of space, you actually have to be very thoughtful about what goes into the story. And the great thing is about this program that you guys are in is that you're going to go through each of the main steps that you need to take to get to the end and be able to edit your story and change it so that it works out well. Now the professors there will tell you about like the word limit and all that stuff, but more or less flash fiction is around 500 words, and you know, more or less in that range, and that's something that's been in the tradition for a while. And so how do you do that? Well, mean, easier said than done, but focusing is kind of like one way of thinking about it. So if you're writing a story that is only 500 words, and you can't have like a really complicated world, yeah? You can't have like 15 different characters that all have, you know, drawn out characters that are complicated and all kinds of subplots. This cannot be Game of Thrones, yeah? You've got to focus it. So, you know, you've got to have like, you know, one or two characters. You should almost always have one main setting, you know, the environment. Now, characters can move within that, but you basically need one setting. And you basically need one topic as well, you know, like there's always going to be some sort of general topic of a story. You basically need to boil it down to one. And conflict, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But you know, more or less, you're going to want to have one major conflict. So you've really got to focus. You've got to like bring it down. And again, if you want to do your novel, you know, you can do that later. But for this project, you got to focus it down. Okay. The next part is really, it's good to start in the middle. Now, this is not normally how we think of short stories. Normally, it's like, okay, in the beginning, I don't know, Harry Potter lived under the stairs. You know, he was abused by his family, and he had a tough time. Oh, you're already like over, yeah. So you've got to get to the point. You've got to get to the interesting part. And what's the interesting part? Maybe in your mind, I mean, maybe of Harry Potter, I guess the conflict between him and Lord Voldemort. Yeah, that's where it gets kind of interesting. So you would cut to that, you know, cut to that scene. And that doesn't mean that this has to be, flash fiction has to be about action, but you would cut to the conflict, cut to the main issue that the character is dealing with, rather than like, Harry Potter was born on this day, in this town, and all that, the background. You're not going to have a lot of space to write background. So you've got to get to the thing that is going to connect to your reader. Right? Like the reader is interested in how these characters live in the world and how they deal with people and conflicts. So you've got to start in the middle. The term for that is in media res, in the middle. Yeah. Okay. At the same time, so these are some tips, yeah, but at the same time, the only rule is that there are no rules, yeah, with fiction. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't like, you know, ways to make your fiction better. In fact, this entire project is about you working on your storytelling so that, you know, you can write a better story. But there are no rules. There are no rules. You can write about whatever you want to write about, as far as I know. I mean, obviously you have to listen to the professors there. But there are no rules. You can write about whatever you want to write about, and you can write about it however you want to write about it. Like you are totally free. Yeah? Now the word limit is another thing. That's something that you guys will deal with. But I think it's important to say this because a lot of students come to storytelling with a lot of stuff in the back of their mind, like, you know, I need to tell the story that people want to hear, or I need to tell the story that was in a movie. or whatever. And that's, if you want to tell the story that's similar to like a movie, that's okay. But just make it your own. You know, make sure that you're making that story your own individual one. And that's kind of the idea, is that yes, there are no rules, but what that means is you have to have self-rule. Yeah. So you have to guide your own writing. I don't know, autogobierno. Yeah. You have to like rule yourself. And how do you do that? Well, actually, I think the next panel workshop is about figuring out the sources of writing. But just to throw my 2 cents in on that, I mean, you've got to get to your interest. Like, what are you into? Yeah? Are you into sports? Are you into the environment? Are you into family or whatever? You've got to go to your interest, because then your story will have some energy, and you need that. Yeah? So always go to your interest and the things you're concerned about. Yeah? And maybe even your obsessions, which typically is kind of like a negative word, but you know, all artists have obsessions, things that they really, it's things that they're not just concerned about, things that they are like kind of always concerned about. Now, you know, for students, very often that's, you know, getting good grades or trying to study, and I don't know, maybe trying to sleep more than 5 hours, find a girlfriend or boyfriend, you know. But whatever it is, whatever your obsessions are, it's good to get in touch with that and maybe put that into your work. Of course, dreams are a big one. If you are a person who is affected by dreams, I mean, like, I don't mean like, you know, the American dream. I mean like the actual dreams, and yeah, and then maybe consider using dreams as a source of imagery, and maybe even the conflict of a story, because with dreams, in some ways we find out who we really are. So, and actually the writer that we're going to look at briefly today, Kafka, that's what he did. He used his dreams and would sort of like take his dreams and write the story out of that. So all of that is to say that there are no rules to writing fiction. Yeah? You can write about whatever you want. You can write about it in the way that you want. But the trade-off is that you've got to rule yourself. You've got to bring out what what you're interested in, what you're concerned about, what your obsessions are, maybe what your actual dreams are. And that's got to guide or rule your story. Yeah? Because then it's like, then you've got a story that is actually you, as opposed to somebody else. Yeah? And that's kind of the idea of fiction, is that everybody is going to write a different story. You know, this is not, you know, writing fiction is not mathematics. You know, there's definitely a lot of reasoning that goes into fiction making and storytelling, but it's not mathematics. Yeah? This is an individual expression. That also doesn't mean that it's just like whatever, like I'll just write a story and whatever. Yeah? You can get better at it. Yeah? It's, I mean, people, like it's a job. Like people, there are writers. Now, granted, it's a little difficult sometimes to make a lot of money, you know, writing, but certainly there are J.K. Rowlings. You know, there are people who make money out of this. Okay. Now, you know, one of the things is, why flash fiction? Why is this even a thing? Well, I mean, that, you know, very short stories have been around as long as people have been telling stories. Yeah, there's fables, in the early Roman times, fables, very short stories with animals. We're reading one today by Kafka. So they've been around forever, as long as people have been telling stories. But with the internet, you've got people who are sort of scouring through it very quickly, looking around for things to read and look at in a very quick manner. And people are not, if they're just kind of going through the internet, searching or looking at Facebook or whatever, they're not going to read a novel doing that. Now, of course, there are novels written through Twitter and Facebook. That's a different workshop. But if you're doing that and you've got like a very short story, you might stop and like read it. So this is actually something that is kind of made for the internet. And if you guys end up putting your stories online, you'll find that people will actually read them. If you put a novel online, maybe abuelo or abuela will read it, and somebody, But if you write a piece of flash fiction, you might have people reading it, which is kind of cool. At any rate, this is one of the big reasons that flash fiction is becoming more popular, because it's a kind of writing that fits well with the internet. The other thing is that out of that, this has been going on since the 1980s, that people have been writing more flash fiction and publishing it. But out of that, people have discovered that it's actually a really good exercise to write a very short story, because you've got to focus and you've got to edit. And that means you can't have a lot of fluff. I don't know if you guys know what fluff is, but like just words that don't mean anything, just words in a story that are just like blah, 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 blah. You've got to take all that stuff out. You've got to like get it down to like what you really need to tell the story well. And so editing is the secret to writing well. This is not something that I was taught in high school. It's really the secret to writing well. And the great thing about the program that you guys are in is that you're going to be kind of going back over the work that you're doing. And that's the secret. That's the one thing you have to learn, is that you take your own writing and whatever comes out of you, and then you later look at it and edit it and change it and be able to get the distance that you need from the story to be able to change it, and not say, sometimes when we write a story, like whatever comes out, we're like, oh, it's perfect. I don't want to change my emotional expression, and that's fine, but to become a better writer, like you've got to be able to change it and look at your own work as if you were somebody else. So editing is the secret to writing well, and you guys are going to be doing that, which is awesome. The other way of thinking about, this depends on how you guys go about the process, but in general, with writing flash fiction, you're going to want to write long. You don't want to limit yourself in the beginning. You write long and then cut it short. So if you write 1,000 words and then you cut it down to 500. That's one thing that happens quite a lot. But again, that's going to depend on how you guys are doing the program. Okay, so I'm going to switch modes a little bit here. I want to quickly tell you about a short story called Caridad by Alex Hernandez. This is a science fiction story written by a Cuban-American writer from Florida. And it's a story about a girl who, on her 16th birthday, is going to get a computer chip implanted into her brain that's going to connect her to her extended familia. Yeah, and so kind of like, like wireless connection with her family, like her extended family, And so the story is about her concern about losing her identity. Am I still going to be me? Or am I going to be, washed away in this sea of family members? And I'm not going to tell you the ending if you guys end up reading it at some point. But the reason that I'm telling you about this story, and that the picture here is meant to show it, is that this story is very much like, there are many like technical aspects to the story. It's very like reasoned, and it's about has a very good structure. This particular story, it's classic storytelling. There's a conflict that the character has to go through, but the main thing is the heart. And a lot of students respond to this story, and it's actually being made into a television series. It's not fully out yet, but they're writing the script. And the reason that people respond to the story is that it has heart. Yeah, when you read the story, you feel connected to that main character. Caridad is her name. You feel connected to her and her conflict, and you want her to do well. And by the end, it has an interesting ending. I guess while I'm saying it, I guess I should send it to Sally to give to you guys. But the point is, don't forget the heart. Yeah, because when readers are reading your story, they want to connect emotionally to the character. If a reader can't connect emotionally to your character, then it's kind of not like a real person. Yeah. So think of that when you're writing. Think of. I mean, that's what you're doing in this project, is doing that. But keep that in the back of your mind that there has to be some kind of emotional connection here, because we're people. Yeah, like we connect emotionally to things. So like you've got to do that. All right. Now we're going to read this very short story, "The Knock at the Manor Gate" by Franz Kafka. And I believe that you guys have a copy. Is that right?
It's in your folder.
So Kafka was born in Prague, and he was Jewish in a society that was not exactly accepting of Jews. Yeah, so a lot of that gets into his stories, and you'll see here that there's this kind of just general sense that you're not accepted by society, that suddenly something could go crazy in your society, and people will form a mob and like start throwing rocks at the windows of the Jewish stores. So he lived in that kind of environment, that he was able to go to school, but Jews were able to go to school, but they were not able to get a job in the government. Yeah, which is quite something, right? So a lot of that weird, like being in a weird position in society is in the story. So you don't need to get everything about the story, but basically it's about a guy who's out in the country with his sister. They're riding, and they go by this big house, and the sister of the main character maybe knocks on the gate, maybe she doesn't. Then they meet some people in the village, and then the head of the manor, the head of the big house, comes and they take him and they arrest him and they basically put him in prison. And of course, the sister leaves and goes home, and then he's in prison. And it's so, yeah, I mean, Kafka's not for everyone, by the way. It's a little bit of a strange story. So I'm going to go ahead and read it. It was summer, a hot day. With my sister, I was passing the gate of a great house on our way home. I cannot tell now whether she knocked on the gate out of mischief or out of absence of mind, or merely threatened it with her fist and did not knock at all. 100 paces further on along the road, which here turned to the left, began the village. We did not know it very well, but no sooner had we passed the first house when people appeared and made friendly or warning signs to us. They were themselves apparently terrified, bowed down with terror. They pointed toward the manor house that we had passed and reminded us of the knock on the gate. The proprietor of the manor would charge us with it. The interrogation would begin immediately. I remained quite calm and also tried to calm my sister's fears. Probably she had not struck the door at all, and if she had, nowhere in the world would that be a reason for prosecution. I tried to make this clear to the people around us. They listened to me, but refrained from passing any opinion. Later, they told me that not only my sister, but I too, as her brother, would be charged. I nodded and smiled. We all gazed back at the manor as one watches a distant smoke cloud and waits for the flames to appear. And right enough, we presently saw horsemen riding in through the wide open gates. Dust rose, concealing everything. Only the tall spears glittered. And hardly had the troop vanished into the manor courtyard before they seemed to have turned their horses again, for they were already on their way to us. I urged my sister to leave me. I myself would set everything right. She refused to leave me. I told her that she should at least change so as to appear in better clothes before these gentlemen. At last, she obeyed and set out on the long road to our home. Already the horsemen were beside us. And even before dismounting, they inquired after my sister. She wasn't here at the moment, was the apprehensive reply, but she would come later. The answer was received almost with indifference. The important thing seemed their having found me. The chief members of the party appeared to be a young, lively fellow who was a judge, and his silent assistant who was called Ass Man. I was asked to enter the farmhouse. Shaking my head and hitching up my trousers, I slowly began to move, while the sharp eyes of the party scrutinized me. I still half believed that a word would be enough to free me, a city man, and with honor too, from this peasant folk. But when I had stepped over the threshold of the parlor, the judge, who had hastened in front and was already awaiting me, said, "I'm really sorry for this man." And it was beyond all possibility of doubt that by this he did not mean my present state, but something that was to happen to me. The room looked more like a prison cell than the parlor of a farmhouse. Great stone flags on the floor, dark, quite bare walls, into one of which an iron ring was fixed. In the middle, something that looked half a pallet, half an operating table. Could I still endure any other air, than prison air? That is the great question. Or rather, it would be if I still had any prospect of release. Okay, so that's The Knock at the Manor Gate by Kafka. And just to point out, these things that you probably already got, they're, like I was saying, focus, yeah? There's one main character, the narrator, yeah? Now, there are other characters. There's the village people, the sister, and the people from the manor. But there's one main character that it's focused on, and it is in first person, yeah? Which can be quite effective in flash fiction. Don't feel you have to do first person though, right? You can do first person, which is where the I is telling the story. You can do second person, which is about you, yeah, talking about what happens to you, which actually is quite challenging to write a story in second person, but very interesting if you can do it. And then third person, which is where you're talking about the narrator is talking about a character. All right. Here we've got one main event. We've got the maybe knocking on the door or not, and then the arrest and the throwing him into prison. We've got the one main setting. Now there are little tiny parts of that. There's the manor, there's the street, and then there is the farmhouse. But it's all contained within one small area. We've got the one main conflict that's basically a legal conflict. Yeah, did she knock on the gate or not? And then that she's being sort of immediately accused, and the brother is taking the blame or something, and then he's convicted and put into prison. It's concise. Yeah. Now there are moments where there are descriptions, but it doesn't go on and on about describing what the street is like. Yeah. That might be very interesting, but in flash fiction you can't go on and on about describing something. Yeah. Now that said, this story obviously evokes or brings out a lot more. Yeah, it's very concise. It sort of gets to the conflict, gets to the issue. But there's a kind of, it's not exactly a twist ending, but sort of like a twist ending. You don't really expect the narrator, the main character, to be in prison when he's telling the story, but actually he is in prison, right? He's telling the story about the past of what happened to him with his sister and why he was put into prison. There's also the thing about there being the creepy part of there's like a ring. I don't know if you can imagine this, but there's like a ring attached to the wall, like in a dungeon, yeah. And then there's like something like an operating table in the middle of the floor. So probably he's being tortured. It seems like they're going to torture him. It seems like, at any rate, something bad is going to happen, and then happens to him. Yeah. So the story evokes a lot more. Now that's important to flash fiction, right? You've got a very small space to tell this story, but you certainly can sort of like have a lot that is brought up. Now, you don't want to bring up too much because then you will lose your reader a bit. But to bring out these other elements that give it a tone, a feeling, yeah? So by the end of the story, it definitely has a creepy feeling, yeah? One final note about this story, and then we're going to move on to talking about your own stories, is that it's good to think about like the form of a story, yeah, the way that a story is told, and that's something again that you guys are going to be working on throughout this project. But in this story, if you realize, we don't actually, the reader, we don't know if the sister knocks on the gate or not, right? Maybe she knocked on it. Maybe she only did it kind of like faking. We actually don't know. And the thing is that the narrator, the main character, doesn't know. And like all of what that does is it emphasizes how unjust this whole situation is. Like, he's being put into prison because his sister knocked maybe on a gate. Like, that's insane. Yeah. And so the reader, not knowing the truth, yeah, we don't even know. It's called narrative ambiguity. It's ambiguous whether she knocks on the gate or not. There are multiple explanations for it, and that emphasizes how unjust it is. And you can sort of see how, if you live in a society that puts barriers on what you can do, if you live in a society where you are a second-class citizen and where you can go to school but you can't get a job in the government, that you're living in a society that is unjust, yeah? And you can put that into the story, and not only in terms of what happens, but in terms of how you're telling the story. One other quick example of that, of like, the form of a story. So there's a story about an alien invasion, and there's an abuela who is talking to the space alien. But so the abuela will say something, and then the alien will say something, but the story doesn't have what the alien says. It has like dot, dot, dot. So the entire story is about, it's kind of like listening to one end of a phone conversation. So the point is that you can play with the form. This goes with the idea of freedom. You guys can write about whatever you want to write about. You also can make your story structured in a way that you want. Yeah? However you want to do it, you can do it. Okay, that's the last point I wanted to make about Kafka. All right, so for me, I think at the center of a story, especially flash fiction, you've got to have that main character. You've got to get it down. And the way to do that traditionally is to do what's called a character Bible. And that means that you have all the information about a character, you write it down, and that doesn't mean that you put all that information into the story, but you have it in your mind. Yeah, and if you need to look at it, you can look at it. So you write it all the information about your character down, and then that will give life to your character to a certain degree. Okay, does that make sense? All right. So what you guys are going to do is take about 7 minutes, and I'll talk to Sally to make sure we're good with the time. Take 7 minutes and write these things down. So now I know that you guys don't have you didn't come this morning with a character in your mind. And that's okay. So just make up stuff. And also, by the way, whatever you write now, like this, you don't have to use this later if you don't want to. If you're like, going home today, you're like, oh man, that character it sucks. I don't want to use that character. I mean, that's fine. That's okay. But for the moment, to do this exercise, write down these things: the name of the character, the age of the character, their physical appearance, their quirks. I don't know if you know what quirks are, but those are like the little things about you that make you interesting, and maybe they're little strange things that you do or habits. maybe you brush your teeth 5 times a day. Maybe you really like clean teeth. Your character, and write those down. And maybe a little more difficult are the wants. What does your character want? Yeah. Yeah, of course, like I said, with college students, very often it's like studying, sleeping more than 5 hours, finding a girlfriend or boyfriend, whatever. But think beyond that as well. What does your character want? And then, as often happens in stories, there's something that the character wants that is obvious. Yeah, something that is they tell everybody, or they're always talking about. But very often, as in fiction, as in real life, there are things that we need that we are not always talking about. And that might be like a psychological need, a need to grow in a certain way, or whatever, something to deal with their past or whatever, but a hidden need. Okay, so work with Sally here, and I'd like you guys to take out a pen and paper and write these things down. Okay.
Okay, we got it. So you've got your booklet, right? You've got your pencil. Is there anybody? Perfect. You've got the time. Oh, reset it to say, you've got 5 seconds already. Go. Name, age, physical appearance, quirks, wants, hidden need. Remember, this is just a technique. So practice it. Go ahead. You've got 7 minutes. Matthew, can you hear me?
Can you see phones?
I don't know how he can hear me, but I
Hello. Hello, kasama ka nga.
So, Sally?
Matthew, can you hear me?
Supposed to.
Hello, Matthew, can you hear me?
Quítalo los audífonos, por lo que cuando tú desenchufas y enchufas.
I can hear everything.
Cuando tú haces eso, te dice algo. Mira, ves, te dice algo. Headphones. School candy headphones. Chécate. Es como que te da opción de...
Hello, can you hear me? Hello?
Hello?
Pues si quieres dejar así porque no
Estaba audífono para escuchar la conversación. Ya, para escucharte yo. Tres minutos 50 segundos. Tenemos que poner Quiero ver, no sé si la cámara está centralizada. Fíjate, se ve bastante bien. Mira aquí. Es que yo quería que se vieran todos aquí. Pero no hay un clip.
Yeah, that works. Yeah, that works. Yeah. Oh, good. Awesome. Okay. All right. I'll see you then.
How many minutes have we got left?
Like 2 minutes.
Oh, we
2
got about 2
minutes,
more minutes.
14 seconds.
Just a taste of practice it. If you need any help, let me know. Yo lo veo ya.
Aquí.
Ok, vamos a darle un par de minutos más. Estoy en comunicación con Matthew ahora. Así que él me dice, dale 2 minutos más, termina con los juegos. Ok, so you got 2 more minutes. Ponle 2 minutos más. Hey, mentors, do this too. Come on. Come on, do it as well. Dale, Chris.
Oh, it's okay. I'm
Ten seconds.
No, porque a otra cosa le pendejo.
Ya se acabó. Ya digo 2 minutos.
Okay, the bell has gone. That's our 7 minutes up. This is a great way to get started. Thank you for this technique, Matthew. I'll pass the time back to you.
Okay, great. Okay, I hope that was interesting for you. Hopefully you got something out. Again, this is not something that you have to use for this particular story, but it's good to just get going, get the stuff out, see what pops out of your head. Sometimes it's actually surprising what comes out of our head. It's interesting. All right, so we're going to move on to the next. We're just doing 2 exercises. So this is the character Bible, and again, you keep that you keep that sort of like in your desk. Yeah, you don't have to put all the information into the story, but you have it in the back in the back of your mind. Now, as in life, yeah, there is typically some sort of conflict going on in a story. Now, the conflict that we read about with Kafka was a legal conflict, essentially, between this guy and these people that live in this big house. Yeah. And it's basically like a legal conflict. Yeah. But there are other conflicts as well, right? If you remember, at the end, he's wondering, man, I would love to be out of prison, but would I even be able to survive? Would I be able to breathe free air? So it seems like he's been there a long time. And that's what happens to people in prison. They get used to the life of being in prison, and they're worried. Could I even live on the outside and get a regular job and do okay? And so there are these other conflicts that are brought in as well. But basically, you need to get to the Harry Potter versus Voldemort conflict. Get to the big one, get to the good one. And a way of thinking about this is imagining one thing that is stopping your character from getting what she wants or needs. Remember, in your character Bible, you've got a list of things that they want or that they have these hidden needs. So, let's say you want to study. Yeah, you want to be able to study more so you can get good grades. That probably doesn't apply at this point in your life, but it might. Say you have a job and you've got to work at this job, and so that's getting in the way of you studying, and that creates a conflict. Yeah, and very often stories have that kind of like energy, where things are kind of like smashing against each other. Now, sometimes that thing that's getting in the way is a person. Yeah. It's like, like your mom or dad or your teacher or your boss or your friend, or if you're a superhero, maybe some of you are superheroes, you might have like a villain who is actively trying to stop you, but very often it's a person. Yeah. It's often institutions as well, like a school, or a church, or I don't know, the Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts or whatever, you know, like some institution, some group is stopping you from getting what you need or want. Yeah. Now, very often, it's not an individual out there in the world. You know, it's not the Joker evilly trying to stop you. In reality, here, most of us have this problem, right? This is a cartoon about the heart and the brain. Very often we make these plans. We build this big thing called the plan, and then our heart is like, oh, butterfly, and then smashes through the plan and moves on. That happens to me at least twice a day. Sometimes this is basically the same idea. You know, the brain is like brain is trying to keep us afloat, and the heart is making it a little bit harder. Yeah. The idea is that sometimes the conflict is inside of us. Yeah. This is an ancient idea. Yeah. Going back to the Greeks, you know, that the individual is made up of various elements, and sometimes those elements are not are not in perfect harmony. Yeah. So that is a different kind of conflict. It was, by the way, also evoked in the story. The character, again, is worried that they will be able to live outside of prison and have like a regular life. Yeah. So think of those two different ways that you can be stopped from getting what you want or need. Yeah, it could be an external thing, you know, like a person or an institution, or it could be internal, you know, and that's up to you. Like how, again, this is however you want to do this, you can do it. So the second exercise is to take 7 minutes and maybe a couple more and write these things down. This one's a little bit more difficult because here you're really thinking about this character a little bit more in depth. But so do what you can with this one. But so you've got 4 different things. So one is write down one need or want of the character. Yeah. So let's say the character wants a boyfriend. Yeah. Now, number 2 is, what is the thing that is getting in the way? So what would that thing be? Okay, maybe they have to work a lot. Yeah. And so they can't meet a boyfriend. Yeah. 3 is, how does the character feel about the conflict? Yeah. So maybe the character wants a boyfriend, but you know, the job is in the way, and maybe maybe they are really upset about it. Yeah. Maybe it's something that they are really upset about. Maybe it's something that they maybe they're a very optimistic person, and they're like, okay, I'll be able to work until the end of summer, and then I'll find a boyfriend then. Yeah. So how does the character feel about the conflict between the job and the getting a boyfriend? And then 4 is how the character first responds. Now, this is just the initial response to the conflict. You know, the story basically would be about how the character like fully responds, like not just their initial response, but maybe second and third response. But what do they do about the conflict? Yeah, do they quit their job and say, you know what, finding a boyfriend is more important than getting a job? Yeah. So do they quit maybe they just quit their job, and that's their way of dealing with the conflict. Yeah. And again, if you know, like in a regular story, it would be more about how the character responds later. But this is just to like get down what's their, like, you know, this one is like, don't think about it. What does the character do? Put the character in that situation. Do they freak out? You know, do they like make a very hard decision? Yeah. What do they do? All right. I hope that's clear. I know this one's a little bit more difficult, but try to work it out. Again, conflict. You've got to have a conflict at the heart of a story. Otherwise, it doesn't go very far. All right, so work on that for 7 minutes.
Okay, our 7 minutes has started, right?
10 minutes.
Okay, perfect. Go for it. If you need some help, let us know. Give us your best shot. And remember, it's just a technique. You don't have to use this if you don't want. Okay. Chris, go for it. Yeah. What did you connect the? I'm just going to borrow this and take it through.
Todavía no estoy ahí todavía,
We got 2 minutes to start 2 minutes.
Okay. Great.
Okay, so Matthew has just sent me a message. He says, if you're finished, share your ideas with the person to you for the last couple of minutes. If you've already finished, say your ideas.
So I know you.
Okay, thank you. For our creative juices flowing. We've got some energy in the room. I'm going to pass back to Matthew because really this is the end of his workshop. We're going to take a little break and then we're going to come back with our next workshop in 10 minutes. So I'm going to pass back to Matthew just to finish off and then we'll go for a break. Back to you, Matthew. Oh.
Okay. Yeah, I think
But never mind. Okay, I'll just do a quick recap. You practiced 2 techniques. You practiced 2 techniques. Remember the one which is character Bible and the one that you've just done with the finding a conflict. Those are both great techniques to get started because there's nothing worse than looking at an empty page. I'll pass back to Matthew to finish off.
Okay, guys. All right. I hope that was helpful, and felicidades. I mean, like, that's you made a great start, and I'm actually looking forward to where you guys go with this. You've got a good program here. You've got lots of steps to take, but I think you made a good beginning. Okay. Sally has my email, so if you guys want to email me questions that you have about anything, and then later as you're getting your story going, remember, the secret to writing is editing. Yeah, it's being able to change your own writing. So if you want feedback at any point in the process, you can always email me and get feedback. I mean, the great thing about the program is you've got a lot of different professors who are going to be coming, which is kind of awesome. So you'll get tons of chances to get feedback. But if you do want to get mine, you just email me. It's not a problem. You're not going to be asking me to read your novel. Flash fiction is pretty quick to read over. So it's not a big deal. So please feel free. All right. I hope you guys have.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. You guys have a good day. And I'll talk to you later.
I'll talk to you later. Bye.
Okay, bye.
He said I should give it to you. I'm going to give it to your mentor so they can tell you. Please take a break, refresh. We've got another workshop coming up to a room near you in 10 minutes. So go refresh yourself. We'll be back here in 10 for the next workshop with the next presenter. Thank you.
Yep. Bye.
Gracias.